The year is 686. An evil ogress by the name of Sinmo has spread her wicked body across all of the land. But in a miracle still celebrated today, King Gampo miraculously builds 108 temples in a single night to subdue this wicked ogress and all of her evil spirits, and to help spread Buddhism throughout the land. Her left foot is pinned by the Paro Temple, Gijulangheng, and in Tibet, her heart by the Yohang Temple. It takes all 108 temples to keep this wicked ogress pinned down. Today we are visiting the land of the Thunder Dragon, a land at crossroads. Does this country continue to maintain old traditions and lifestyles, or does it adapt to some of the modern ways? Frankly, it hasn't been that long since TV and the internet were introduced, or for that matter, even outsiders. Protected deep in the unforgiven Himalayas, this country is a land steeped in tradition, trying to decide whether to join a global society or to remain isolated and thus maintain its unique identity as it's justifiably so proud. Today we're heading to Bhutan, the most foreign, and here I am air quoting the word foreign, the most foreign culture I have ever witnessed in all of my travels. This country is so unusual and so few people have ever visited it that I'm going to be covering Bhutan in an Active Travel Adventures first. This is going to be a two-part series. Today is going to be part one, and I'm going to cover the country and the culture itself, because when you go to Bhutan, it's as much, if not more so, to explore this most unusual culture than it is to do the adventure traveling, which I'll be covering in part two. I did a very interesting trek on an old Silk Road section, so I'll be covering that. Plus, you can also do some whitewater rafting and mountain biking. So I'll do that in 2 weeks when I come back to do the adventure part. But as I said, today we're going to focus on this interesting country in and of itself. This is the Active Travel Adventures podcast, and I'm your host, Kit Parks. I hope you're going to enjoy this most exotic destination, the Kingdom of Bhutan, a country many people have never even heard of and would certainly have difficulty finding on a map. I struggle to put into words the culture I witnessed. Bhutan is as complex and complicated as it is simple. Bhutan is light years ahead of the rest of the world in some respects, yet anchored deep in the past in others. I'll be honest with you. While I'd heard of Bhutan, prior to my trip, all I could tell you was that it was landlocked in the Himalayan mountains, promoted gross national happiness, or GNH, over gross national product, GNP, and was the first country to ban plastic shopping bags, and this I knew only because I have a reusable bag business on the side. When a hiking buddy said he was putting together a group to head to Bhutan, I said I was in. Between my other businesses, travels, and putting together this podcast, I didn't have any time to do any homework on Bhutan, so I truly arrived clueless, which made my discoveries all the more exciting. All I knew is that we were going to do a 4.5-day trek along the former Silk Road in the Himalayas, watch one of Bhutan's largest festivals, and see some of the countryside and temples. Because the time difference is so extreme, about a half a day for me, I arrived in Bangkok 5 days early and got a chance to explore that city for the first time. Other members of my group started staggering in over the next few days, and we headed to the airport together to fly to Paro, which is the only international airport in Bhutan. Because of the rugged mountains, there's no airport in Bhutan's capital city of Thimphu, and only a couple of regional ones. Except for the Maldives, Bhutan is the least populated country in Southeast Asia, and it has a little under 800,000 people at this recording. It's about the size of Switzerland. Only about 30,000 people visit each year, and that has been growing. To put that in perspective, think about this. That means more people are going to attend a Sunday Green Bay Packers game than visit Bhutan in a whole year. Bhutan is not just rugged mountain peaks. It has many trout-filled lakes, but lakes are considered sacred, so you're not allowed to swim in them, fish them, or make noise around them. Bhutan has 4 ecosystems, including the frost-free subtropical area in the south, where you can grow guavas, oranges, and you find an abundance of exotic wildlife, to a temperate, subalpine, and the most commonly known, the Himalayan alpine zone. Snow leopards and tigers live in Bhutan, as does the hornbill, a bird familiar to anyone with a child addicted to the Lion King. In South Asia, Bhutan ranks first in economic freedom and ease of doing business, and is the least corrupt. However, and I'm guessing here, perhaps because it was closed off to much of the world until recently, it is also the least developed country in Asia. The terrain is rugged, at least in the mountain sections, which I'm guessing is the reason that Bhutan has never been conquered or colonized, and thus has been able to retain its distinct culture. After China annexed Tibet and India did the same with Sikkim, Bhutan's King 4 realized that Bhutan, sandwiched between the giants China and India, might be next, and decided to make sure that Bhutan emphasized its truly distinct culture, making it more difficult for another country to absorb it. He also began to cultivate diplomatic relationships with other countries late in the last half of the 1900s. But it wasn't until the 1970s that outsiders even got a peek into this unusual nation. TVs weren't introduced until 1999, and it wasn't until 2005 that the internet was unleashed. TV and the internet, along with the introductions from students studying abroad who returned home with new ideas and unfortunately sometimes drugs, began to change Bhutan. So the kingdom now struggles with how to herd cats now that the kids see that there's more to the world than agricultural subsistence. Like many developing countries, once kids see less strenuous opportunities in the cities, they flock there and agriculture diminishes. There's a concerted effort to retain youth in the villages now. I found that Japan has a program in Bhutan where it promotes and encourages tourists to learn farm skills from the locals. You can take a class with a local in everything from mushroom harvesting to making yogurt. I'm sorry I didn't learn about these opportunities until the last of my trip, and I would encourage you to take advantage of them when you go, and I'll put some information on how to reach out to them on the website. You can also arrange for a homestay for either just a meal or to stay overnight, which is also a really cool way to connect with the locals and to see how they actually live. I would have preferred more cultural interaction than I had because the Bhutanese people are very friendly and I must say, as an aside, a very handsome people. But should you fall in love with a Bhutanese person, you can marry, but should you divorce or your mate dies, you've got to leave the country again. Polygamy is allowed for either sex, but it's falling out of favor. My guide said at least the men were realizing it's too hard to keep all the wives happy and equal. The current king says he's only going to take one wife, although his father had 4 sisters as his wives. In Bhutan, there's a national dress, and most people still wear it. For men, it's called a go. This is a billowy woven jacket with an impossibly white, wide cuffs over a matching skirt that hits just below the knee. Plus, they'll put on some black knee socks and loafers. It's got a kangaroo-like pouch in the front, which means you're rarely going to see a guy in a backpack, because they can store all sorts of things in this pouch. The women wear a kira, which is similar to the men's, although it's often more colorful, is more fitted, and has more of an Asian cut, so it's a jacket over a full-length skirt, often of different weaves and color schemes. The national dress is required attire for the Bhutanese whenever they visit any of the Buddhist temples and for many occupations. I would guess that in excess of 95% of the men and women that I saw were wearing the national dress. You can see photos at activetraveladventures.com. I found the outfits to be quite attractive, and the weaving patterns and the skills are exquisite. At the festivals and other special occasions or temple visits, the men would also add a cream-colored shawl-like scarf that they drape over their ko, and the women would wear a colorful silk scarf over their left shoulder. We timed our trip so that we could see the Paro Shetsu Festival. This is where all the local people from the region attend in their finest and most colorful outfits. It's quite the sight, and the whole plaza area is filled with the folks in their national dress all the way up the hillside. It's super colorful and very interesting. At the Shetsu Festival, it lasts about 4 days, and it's held each spring, and it's one of the largest and most significant events in the district. This hugely popular event is also a way for the young people to meet potential mates from the surrounding areas. Most Bhutanese have been to so many festivals that they know the monks' colorful mass dance routines by heart. These dances tell the Bhutanese stories and their moral tales while they're cementing the history of the people, and they're a way for even the illiterate people to know the stories. For the ceremonial dances, the monks will put on these whirling dervish-like outfits and then wear an intricately carved mask as they perform the ancient routines that the Bhutanese families have enjoyed since their childhood. At one point, I heard this rapid beating of a drum behind me, and out from a covered VIP area popped a masked monk with a skin-covered drum he was beating on with his large hook. He and other similarly dressed monks entered into the crowds. Spectators would then bow their heads down and receive the little hooked bop on the head, which wards off evil spirits and offers a blessing. As I was videotaping this unusual sight, one of the monks came up towards me and bopped me on the head. I'll put a video of that on the website. It's kind of funny. There also appear some red-faced clown masked monks who are collecting money from the crowd, I assume for a blessing. There's a great photo of this outrageous costume and with the locals in their national dress on the website as well. While I didn't see it at this festival, sometimes these clown-masked monks have a phallic-shaped nose. You're going to see a lot of phallic symbols throughout Bhutan, and particularly in the countryside. Sometimes the houses are even adorned with them, particularly in the Panaka region, to ward off the evil spirits. There's a famous temple there dedicated to the divine madman, Lama Drupka Kwenli. I'm sure I mispronounced that. This guy lived in Bhutan in the 1500s, and he was an outrageous monk who often taught with really strong sexual overtones that shocked his fellow monks, but delighted the crowds. On the walk to this temple, in his honor, the little village is flooded with phallic symbols. They're painted on the house walls, on the homes, they're available for sale in little stands in front of it, and many infertile couples will often visit the temple in hopes of gaining fertility. I put a really humorous photo of a phallic arrow pointing to the restrooms on the website. You can reach it at activetraveladventures.com/19 or /Bhutan. And Bhutan is spelled Bhutan. I was told that the astounding number of penises throughout the town was in no way sexual, but simply just to ward off the evil spirits, and also, I think, to celebrate one of the people's most famous and outrageous lamas, the Divine Madman. Now, back to the festival. Near the end of the festival, an enormous embroidered silk scroll called a thenka, and by enormous, I'm going to guess somewhere like 100 by 150 feet of intricately detailed and embroidered scroll is unveiled this one day of the year in the middle of the night, and then it gets rolled back up before the sun hits it. It is said that the scroll is so sacred that merely gazing at it erases your sins. The line to see the scroll up close was naturally very long. I'm going to put a photo of the scroll online. Like most festivals, this festival is held in honor of Guru Rinpoche, the saint who introduced Buddhism to the Bhutanese back in the 8th century. Now Bhutan is a bastion of Buddhists who practice a form called Mahayana, which believes that one acts in ways to bring enlightenment to all sentient beings. Virtually everyone in Bhutan is a Buddhist, and I saw no signs of any other religion. I tried without much success to wrap my head around their Buddhist beliefs. I think I finally understand that the various Buddhas are actually just one Buddha, the original Buddha, who manifests in other monks over time. They regularly worship at home and in the village temples, and it's a natural part of their day. Each temple also has a local deity that one prays to for blessings and to ward off evil spirits. The temples are filled with all the many different Buddhas, each with a different gift or purpose, such as the god of compassion. This particular Buddha has 1,000 arms and with an eye on the hand, which helps it to see the needs of all sentient beings and to offer help and compassion. Some of the temples we went to had hundreds, if not thousands, of Buddhas in them. In Bhutan, you see red-robed monks everywhere. In the past, if you chose to be a monk and changed your mind, you'd be beaten badly enough to have to go to the hospital. Nowadays, I believe King 4 changed that, and you can buy your way out of it if it turns out you aren't cut out to be a monk. And these monks are able to meditate in the noises of temples for hours. At the end of my trip, I was most familiar with Guru Rinpoche, the celebrant of the festival. Because the king, King 5, attended the festival in honor of Guru Rinpoche, the sacred silk embroidered scroll was left out just a little bit longer than usual. Unlike most countries, this Bhutanese leader is so beloved that his Secret Service folks seemed more interested in preventing us from taking unauthorized photographs of the king than worrying about any potential assaults on the king. In fact, I stood next to the red carpet that the king used and was within 5 feet of the man as he left the festival. The day before, one of King 4's wives, he married 4 sisters, as I said, attended with her grandson, who looked to be about 3. This child, the nephew of King 5, is the reincarnation of a famous Buddhist leader and is said to have proven it by knowing certain things that only a reincarnate could know, such as where treasures were buried and which room was his in a previous life. All I can say is, watching him leave with his grandmother, I can only say that I've never seen such a poised child, particularly in somebody so young, and he did look adorable in his monk's robe. While I didn't see it, I learned about another interesting festival called the Naked Dance Festival. In this festival, at the stroke of midnight, in the cold, because it's usually in Octoberish, 12 selected men don a white, almost, remember Casper the Friendly Ghost? They put on a mask that's kind of like that, and then they have a decorative little cape, and they dance naked in the village for 2 days. It's an honor to be one of the selected 12. This festival celebrates Bhutan's welcoming of refugees that arrived naked from a neighboring ruler. The way I understand it, The then emperor of the adjoining region, in an effort to ward off evil spirits, national disasters, disease, and intruders, would select several male and female teenagers. After a month-long celebration, the teenagers would be stripped naked and paraded in the street along with a special altar that would be sacrificed at the end of the parade. The citizens would spit and curse at these young folks and throw flour and ash at them. The citizens believed that by doing so, all of the community's misfortunes would be carried away by these sacrificial kids, who were then banished from the village after being fed one last time and then told never to return. They were given nothing to survive and departed naked, trying to fend their way in the world. Over the decades, and perhaps centuries, these surviving teens made their way into what is now Bhutan, and Bhutan welcomed these refugees. And so these kids created new communities, and this is where the festival is now held in honor of those surviving kids in order to bring blessings on their new community. I have a super fun photograph of the naked dancers on the website, but don't worry, I blocked out the private parts to make it G-rated on the website. Getting back to the current king, to celebrate the birth of King 5's son, all 82,000 families in Bhutan planted a tree. And volunteers planted a whole lot more, bringing the total to 108,000 trees planted in honor of the new prince. Bhutan has it in their constitution that at least 60% of the country remains forest, and currently I believe it's over 70%. I kept hearing that 108 number quite a bit while I was in Bhutan. It seems to be an auspicious number. As I recall, Chimmy, our guide, said, I believe it was 108 poles, these tall vertical poles with these white prayer flags are put out to bring good wishes to a departed one. And remember, because they believe in reincarnation, their perceptions of death are going to be much different than the practices that I as a Christian believe. The prayer flags are one of my fondest memories of Bhutan. The white ones are symbolic for putting good wishes out for somebody that's passed away, but you'll see alongside bridges, on peaks of mountains, and any high areas where the wind can capture them will be a string of colorful prayer flags that are imprinted with mantras. And these are set up to impart good wishes to all sentient beings. It's one of my favorite and fondest memories of Bhutan, and I believe that's what Janet said also about her visit to Nepal as well. In addition to the prayer flags, you'll also see many prayer wheels, and these are vertical cylinders that you turn clockwise while mentally or openly saying a mantra, again, to get the blessings and to get the good karma. So even if you're illiterate and cannot read the scrolls of the prayer wheels, you still get the same benefit. It was a fascinating and a very important part of my perceptions of Bhutan. Another thing they do with their dead is they do cremation, and then they make these little stupas or chorten things, which kind of looks like a miniature circus tent that's made out of ashes and some mud, and on the bottom of them it'll carve, they'll bore out a little hole, and a scroll with mantras will be in there. And then for the dead, these are a little bit larger than the ones that I would actually see. Those get tossed in the river. But what you'll see along the countryside and in little caves and nooks and crannies, and it has to be a little bit sheltered, you'll see these little miniature stupas, which are also sacred little blessings with the little baby scrolls in them. And they are also to give blessings and good wishes to the living. I have a super great photo of that too I'll post as well. In 2006, to set an example for his son, King 4 abdicated the throne. King 5, who is the king that I saw at the festival, was crowned in 2008. His father, before abdicating to his son, also switched the country over to a constitutional monarchy, much like the UK. However, they put a clause in there that the king can be impeached with a 2/3 majority of the legislature. Therefore, this fledgling democracy is only a decade old, and Bhutan is still trying to figure out this whole democracy thing. A new election is forthcoming, and the candidates are not allowed to visit large groups to prevent bribery, so they have to convey their positions, as far as I can tell, only via the press. During the campaign season, all weddings and large gatherings are either forbidden or they have to be reported in advance, presumably so that they could be monitored for potential election corruption. From my perspective, it looks to me like the government acts as basically a benevolent dictator. With its gross national happiness program, all policies are either decided based on whether it would be good for the people and nation overall. The 4 pillars of gross national happiness are: 1. Sustainable and equitable socio-economic development. 2. Environmental conservatism. 3. Preservation and promotion of culture such as the national dress and Buddhism. 4. Good governance evaluated by psychological well-being, health, time use, education, community vitality, and living standards. For a poor country, Bhutan places a huge emphasis on preserving its environment. Like I said earlier, over 70% of Bhutan is preserved forest, and this allows for a rich wildlife that includes the aforementioned snow leopards and tigers, and a healthy primate population. Bhutan has almost 800 kinds of birds and over 5,400 species of plants. Bhutan gets most of its energy from hydroelectric power, and already 10% of its cars are electric, so it hardly emits any carbon, making it one of the few carbon-neutral countries in the world. In fact, it's actually carbon negative, meaning that the trees are now absorbing more carbon than the country emits, and by a wide margin. Virtually all the produce is organic, and pesticides and chemicals are rarely used. Bhutan is aiming to be completely organic by 2020. Yet, in contrast, they often litter, which is one of the conundrums I kept witnessing. So as green as it is on a macro level, there's still much work to do on a micro level. The government seems to be addressing the litter issue with a signage campaign along the highways. In fact, there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, propaganda signs along the highways and in the communities advising people on appropriate behavior. Our trekking litter was even evaluated upon our return back to civilization to make sure that we were bringing back the appropriate amount of garbage for the people and the time in the woods. Someone's actually checking the inventory of what was purchased and used against the cans, etc., that were brought back for appropriate disposal. I was told my guide company had to provide the inspector with a grocery list of what was brought in. This benevolent government doesn't just discourage littering with highway signs. There's also signs to discourage speeding, such as, "It is not rally, enjoy the valley." And to improve health awareness, no AIDS equal no AIDS. That is, KNOW AIDS equal NO AIDS. I also saw a sign saying, "It's a citizen's duty to report anyone using or dealing drugs." In the paper, I saw that a man got a 5-year sentence for having drugs, and his friend got 3 months for failing to turn him in. While I would call all the signs I saw beneficial propaganda, and I can't say that I actually disagreed with any of the slogans or the signage, it did somewhat remind me of Chairman Mao, who was by no means a benevolent dictator. Being raised in an outspoken country that encourages diverse opinions and ideas, I was always a bit uncomfortable about the control the government has over the people. I never saw any signs of negative behavior from the government, but I can see how in the wrong hands, the government control could turn ugly quickly, like the Chinese Communist government it feared last century. In fact, Bhutan requires all foreigners except for Indians to hire a local guide for the duration of your trip, whether or not you're hiking. Your visa is only for the areas included on your trip itinerary. All trips are custom, whether it's a party of 1 or 2, which is the most common, or a party of 8 like ours. To control foreign visitation, the government sets a per diem cost, so whether you're camping or staying at a 3-star guest hotel, the daily tariff is the same, which is all-inclusive except for drinks, including water sometimes, and your tips. If too many people want to come to Bhutan, the government just raises the daily tariff, so it's been as high as $300 a day, and in the off-season, sometimes it'll go as low as $200 a day. I paid $250 a day. All guides are trained and approved by the government, as are the restaurants that we went to for our buffet meals. They had to be inspected and certified for tourists. When we were on our own to wander Paro or Thimphu, we could go into other restaurants, and they had some amazing bakeries. And once, after a couple of weeks of curry, we told our guide Chimmy that we'd prefer to pay even though our meals were included at the buffet, and just go out for pizza rather than eating that prepaid buffet once more. Indians, with whom Bhutan has a special and a very tight relationship, are the only folks who don't need a visa. The Indian influence is striking too in the food. It's very spicy and much tastier than I thought we'd find. Their most popular dish is a chili cheese. Hot chilies in Bhutan are not considered a spice, but a vegetable. That's how much they're eating them, like crunching them like green beans. The tourist restaurants dumb down the spice level for us, but they'll offer a bowl of chilies on the side so you can jazz up the food to your own taste. You're going to find it easy to communicate because English is taught in the school, so you don't need to learn Dzanga, but it is polite to at least learn the thank you and please. In fact, all signs are both in Dzanga and English, so it's quite easy to navigate. I've got a clip to a YouTube video that'll teach you the polite phrases on the website. On our last night, our group splurged and paid extra to stay at a 5-star hotel called Jiwa Ling. Built only 14 years ago in the Bhutanese tradition, it was the most extraordinary lodge I've ever stayed in and is included as part of National Geographic's World's Most Extraordinary Lodges. I'll put a link to it on the website. It took craftsmen over 5 years to carve the lodge in the traditional Bhutanese way. The lodge included a serene tea room, a meditation room, and a temple. We went to a lot of temples in Bhutan, and it was always a little bit noisy because people were visiting them, the guides were explaining things, and there was just noise. However, in this quiet hotel temple, it's the first time I was able to quietly sit alone, smell the incense, listen to the chanting monks. This was on tape. I felt the peace and the sacredness of the site. In Bhutan, sometimes the infrastructure doesn't work, so it's nice to end our trip with such reliable hot water and a shower with good water pressure. In developing countries, you need to go with an attitude of appreciating what does work instead of counting what doesn't. In other words, go over with the glass half full attitude and you'll be fine, and you're going to appreciate when things go right. Expect that the power is going to occasionally go out. You may not have good water pressure. Sometimes you won't even have hot water. You're going to need to drink bottled water, although some restaurants offered filtered water. And like most developing countries or ancient countries, the sewer systems just can't handle toilet paper. So you have to put it in a little small trash can next to the toilet instead of down the toilet. It's funny this year, I've spent so much time traveling in developing countries that when I'm home, sometimes I'm looking for the little trash can on the side and I feel like I'm being naughty when I flush it. Similar to backpacking to me, a visit to a developing country makes me appreciate more all the little things that I take for granted at home, especially reliable power and water and clean drinking water. Another thing about Bhutan, I also felt, rightly or wrongly, that individual critical thinking is discouraged in favor of agreement with the group and community. Indeed, group cohesion and cooperation is critical for survival in a village. But I often felt a sense of unease with the groupthink mentality. Crafts such as painting, weaving, embroidery, and carving are huge and are used not only in the national dress, but also in the required architecture of homes and temples. Buildings must conform to Bhutanese tradition, which is quite charming. It has this massive dental molding, I'm going to say like 8-inch blocks, which decorate what would be an ordinary rectangular building. And then these moldings and the sides of the buildings are carved and colorfully painted with lotus and other flower decorations and symbols. They're quite charming. It reminded me a bit of like a Swiss chalet with a decidedly more colorful slant. Be sure to check out the photos on the website. Not just the homes, but the many Buddhist temples over the centuries are adorned with these paintings. The artists are learning the traditional patterns at a technical school. On temples and homes, at least, only the traditional symbolic patterns can be used. Some of the murals in the temples are telling stories, but they're all in the traditional style as well. I did seek out art galleries to check out whether independent art was permitted and or encouraged, and was happy to see some skilled modern art. However, most of the stores are filled with traditional styled paintings. Virtually everyone in Bhutan is a devout practicing Buddhist, and it's common to see monks walking the streets or shopping in the markets in their flowing red robes, often talking on the cell phones like the rest of us. Astrology plays a big part in the Bhutanese life, and life revolves around the lunar calendar. Auspicious days are indicated in the daily paper to determine whether or not it's a good day to marry or buy land, for example. Buddhists have an interesting way to name babies, and we were fortunate to see 3 babies get blessed at one of the temples. There are 2 jars at the temple, one for the boys and one for the girls. The parent will then reach into the appropriate jar and select a name for the child. There are about 30 names from which to choose. Whatever name the parent picks out of the jar becomes the baby's name. However, if the parents don't like the name, it's not unheard of for them to try another temple. Important decisions may also be determined by the roll of the die. There are 3 die on a plate by the temple altar. Each temple has its own 2 good numbers and the rest are bad numbers. If you have a big decision to make, you roll the temple die. If you roll a good number, you go forward with the decision. If you roll a bad number, you do not, unlike the baby names, you don't get to go to another temple to see if you can get some good numbers. Buddhists do not believe in killing anything, not even a bug. If you kill a spider or mosquito, you may spend the next few lives as that kind of a bug. Since a dog's next reincarnation is to be human, dogs have been allowed to proliferate. I would bet that there are more dogs per capita in Bhutan than anywhere else on the planet. Our first month in Paro, we had a dog howling wake-up call that greatly was never repeated. Dogs are everywhere. I have never seen anything like it. I did see a sign saying that they were trying to round up the dogs for mass rabies and sterilization efforts. And here's a funny story. On the way to the market one day, the dogs were harassing a large white truck in front of us. They were barking and growling and otherwise intimidating the truck's driver. Tashi, our driver, said that the white truck resembled the sterilization vet's truck, so the dogs were warning the driver to back off. Too funny. Despite all the dogs, I only saw one sickly dog, so they seemed to be well fed by the local townspeople. Dogs have free rein of the streets and villages, as do the cows. But they eventually move. Bhutan doesn't have many exports, with the notable exception of hydroelectric power, which it exports to India. But it does have one of the world's rarest commodities in the world. Currently, this commodity is more valuable than gold. Cordyceps, considered an aphrodisiac, plus it's advertised as a miracle mushroom benefiting energy, cholesterol levels, immune system, blood pressure, respiratory illness, and as a regulator of the kidney and the liver, is the mold that grows on top of a caterpillar. It is harvested once every 5 years in the highest altitudes of Bhutan by the locals. For some nomads, this fungus is a literal gold mine. There are nomadic tribes throughout the country, distinguishable by their different colors but for each region, and their attire, especially some fantastical hats. The fungus only appears at elevations between 14,500 feet and 17,000 feet. Because of the extreme altitudes, many people get sick and suffer, and some even die trying to harvest this amazing fungus. It's grueling work, and as many as 5% of the harvesters can make over $1 million, which in a country where most people live off of less than $1 a day is obviously a substantial financial opportunity. Because of the money to be made, poaching of other tribes' lands is common and obviously meets with local resistance. King Ford designated that only the local people within the crops region are the ones officially allowed to harvest the fungus. Another thing in Bhutan they have male and female rivers. The male rivers are fed by glaciers and are cold, obviously, while the female rivers are fed by underwater hot springs. There's a place where a male and a female river meet at the Bunakazang Palace and Administrative Office. This magnificent structure, which in English would translate as the Palace of Great Happiness, is also where the king gets coronated and where he keeps his office during the winter months. You also see a ton of monks also living there as well. That's their administrative offices as well. In the capital city of Thimphu, in fact in the whole country, there's not a single street light. But instead of traffic lights, officers use fanciful hand signals to direct traffic that is not necessarily clear to a Westerner. They did try streetlights in Thimphu once, but the people didn't know how to use them, so they were eventually removed. Most of the country is made up of subsistence farmers and their families. There's an abundance of organic fresh vegetables, and much of the mountainside is terraced for rice paddies. It's quite scenic, but I'm sure backbreaking work. The popular town markets show the many available crops, dried and fresh meats, dried cheeses, plus a multitude of spices for incense that people can hand roll their own. The smell of incense is pervasive in Bhutan. All homes have their own private altar, and temples will have a large outside incense burner, in addition to the inside ones. So it's normal to smell various kinds of incense burning throughout the day, and I kind of like that. Where I was in Bhutan is high up, and the town of Paro that we flew into is about 9,000 feet above sea level. Fortunately, we had the Paro Chetsu Festival to check out while we acclimated to the higher altitudes before our climb. Near the end of our trip, we had lunch on the mountainside overlooking the airport, which is quite small and the runway is short. It was fun watching the planes weave between the mountains at takeoff, and I didn't remember finding it scary on takeoff or landing. I think that airport in Nepal that Janet talked to us about in episode number 17 looked much more scary, or shall I say exciting. I found Bhutan to be fascinating and complicated. I saw so many good things they're doing to improve the lives of the people, yet was often troubled by the government control, which, as I said, seems benevolent, but what if a later king is not so benevolent? Perhaps that's the wisdom of King IV, who installed the legislator and gave them the opportunity to get rid of any future bad king. I would encourage anyone who is fascinated by unusual cultures to head to Bhutan. I want to go back to explore the temperate regions of Bhutan, hopefully in the next year or two. I fear that now that the cat is out of the bag, with the introduction of the TV and the internet, Bhutan's going to struggle to maintain its unique culture, and it's going to morph like so many of us into a global community of sameness. In our next episode, I'm going to review my trek in Bhutan, plus also talk about rafting and mountain biking in this mysterious country. Also in this second part, I'll be telling you about Tiger's Nest, which is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. And it was a hike up to that, so I've actually put that into our part 2 on that. We did that on day 2, and as far as I was concerned, the trip was worthwhile just to see that. Can't wait to tell you about it. If you've enjoyed, or not, this expansive cultural take on Bhutan, please write and let me know at kit@activetraveladventures.com or call me at 252-515-0166. I'd love to hear from you on what you think about this or any of my previous episodes or any ideas for future episodes. I'd like to also ask you, if you would please, to share this episode with another adventurous friend or a travel friend, because sharing is the best way to get the word out about the Active Travel Adventures podcast. That, and also writing a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast from. Before we sign off, too, I've got an important safety thing to discuss with you. On my first edition on Nicaragua, at the time, everything was very safe there. At the time of this recording, however, they are having some political unrest in Nicaragua in the capital city of Managua, which, as you'll recall, I recommended that you have a driver get you out of that city anyway. It's not the best place to be, but once you get out of Managua, everything seemed to be fine and was fine according at least to the people that I spoke to. I did get a travel advisory from the State Department to avoid, and you should always be avoiding any type of political congregations or demonstrations anyway, because they can sometimes turn unruly with no notice. Anyway, they are having some conflict with the people against Ortega right now in the capital city. So please use the links that are on the travel planners that get you to the State Department to let you know exactly what is going on and whether it's safe or not to travel to a particular place. And these links are on all the travel planners that you get for free if you sign up for the newsletter or ask for any travel planners on the website. So please always check that before making any plans. Thanks. I travel not just to see the pretty places, but also to enjoy and explore new cultures. And Bhutan was just so unusual, I had to share that with you in this special edition. I appreciate you listening, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with the actual adventure in Bhutan. Until then, this is Kit Parks, and adventure on.